I had zero boundaries. In fact, I had what I call like the anti-boundaries because I was going to be the most available doula. I was going to be the most present and I was going to stay up as long as they took and I was going to be available 24/7 and that was going to be my thing, and that's changed a lot.
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. You were lucky enough to have 3 doulas on today and also 3 birth educators on today who all talk a lot. So we're going to try our best not to overtake each other with our comments and conversation because that's what we do in regular life. So this is really going to be a test of pacing ourselves. So we're going to see how that works. Ashley and I have Heather Taylor on today. Heather's a doula in our community, and we wanted to talk about boundaries because that is something that we reinforce, explore, go over, talk about, revise in our doula education series, as well as just doulas in our community. Boundaries are incredibly important for a successful business, incredibly important for a happy and successful life. And a lot of us don't have very good boundaries when we come into birth work because we are used to being givers, and that's just who we are. So we want to talk about that today. And Heather has a lot of good examples of how she has organized those in her life. And yeah, she's really good at boundaries.
Heather's like our sensei for teaching us all how to practice boundaries in our business to make this business sustainable for us. I know Kara and I all the time will reach out to Heather and be like, so I have this issue with this client, and she'll be like, boundaries.
Just say no.
What limits are you setting for yourself?
And now Heather needs a t-shirt that says Boundary Sensei. That was brilliant, Ashley. I like that. Boundary Sensei. Well, welcome, Heather. We're glad that you're here today.
Yay. I'm so excited. This is my absolute favorite topic to talk about ever. I can't wait to get into it.
Well, can you start with kind of your origin story, like how you came into birth work, and then we'll get into the boundary thing. But I think having our listeners understand a little bit about your background with your birth experiences is going to help.
Sure. So I didn't ever have a doula. I didn't come into birth work from the typical, oh, my doula was so amazing and so wonderful and I wanted to be like her. I actually had no idea that birth work was even a thing until after I had both my kids. So 2 boys, one of them is almost 12 next month, as a matter of fact, which is mind-blowing in and of itself. And the other one is 8.5. Both were hospital births. And the first one was mostly straightforward. I didn't know what I didn't know, and that probably saved a lot of trauma because a lot of the things that went on I would never allow into my birth space now at this point in my life. But it was fine. I took the hospital class. It was through Kaiser up in Irvine, and they tell you you'll start having contractions and they'll get stronger, and then you come in and you can get your epidural and have your baby. And that kind of aligned with what I was taught my whole life about birth. So I was like, cool, we'll do that. And about, I think it was like 2 days before my due date, I woke up and I realized that, oh, I think I'm having contractions and things are starting. Again, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I went into triage because I'm like, there are a lot of things happening that I don't quite understand. And they did a vaginal exam and she was like, oh, you have a long way to go. What I didn't know is at the time is she did a membrane sweep without consent. I was wondering why it was so uncomfortable. So I went home and they told me to take a Benadryl and go to sleep. But between the time they told me to take that Benadryl and the time I actually got to it, my labor was progressing. Unbeknownst to me, I was just having contraction. And so I took the Benadryl and right when I started to go to sleep, I think I started moving into active labor. So I got to spend the first 2 or 3 hours of my active labor drowsy and exhausted. So fast forward, my contractions got to whatever point they said. I think that 5 minutes apart for a minute long hour situation. And I called and the response I got was, you're a first timer. There's no way you're in labor enough to come in. We just saw you this morning. Go back to sleep. Cool. Except for I couldn't sleep because they were really intense. They continue to get more intense. And I remember calling back like in 2 hours, telling them now they're 4 minutes apart. They hurt even more. Can I please come get checked out? And I was told no again, because I was a first timer and couldn't be in as much labor as I needed to be admitted. Okay. This happened 2 more times until finally I told my husband, if this isn't labor, either I'm dying or my baby's dying. So we need to go get checked out because this hurts really freaking bad. And he said, I'll call. And I said, don't you dare pick up that phone. I'm showing up. I'm going to make them look at me. So we did. We went to the hospital, and I'll never forget like stopping every 3 minutes on the way down to the car, in the car freaking out. And every 3 minutes on the way up to the hospital, I was having very regular contractions. And when I got to the hospital again, I was told, you're not in as much labor as you think you are, so it's going to be some time. And I remember them taking an hour or two just to get me into triage.
That was before even another vaginal check?
Yeah, all of this. So when they finally got me back in there, they do a vaginal exam and she goes, oh, you're like 7 centimeters. You are in labor. And I said, oh my gosh. And interestingly, the first thought I had was I need to call my family because my family had expected to be there for the birth. And that was the only thing I could focus on was get my family there so they're not mad at me, so they don't miss it. And my poor husband's over here like, let's just take a beat. Like, you're doing pretty well. Like, maybe this could just be us. And I'm like, no, I have to get my family here. Boundaries. We'll talk. We'll continue to talk. But anyways, they showed up. And my whole plan with this birth was contraction, epidural. That's how this was going to go. I didn't need to feel it. I didn't need to experience it. And so when I had asked for that epidural, they rushed me through. They put an urgent stat order, whatever. Nobody said, hey, if you just hang a beat, you could probably have this baby in the next hour. No problem, right? Nobody talked to me about that. So they got me my epidural, and I think I had it for a whole hour before I pushed him out. The midwife came in and she just saw that he was coming and was like, oh, it's time to have a baby. So, okay, cool. And then a couple of things I was thankful for is she really did help me clear the space, and she excused a couple of people. So it was just my husband and one other person. And then she told me to reach down and pick up my baby and deliver him myself. And she put him straight on my skin. And I remember her backing the nurses off so we could have this bonding time. So there was all these amazing things that I was like, oh, wow, this is really cool. And in that moment negated all the gaslighting that I had just experienced. So for me, I was like, oh, perfect birth, and felt that way for many years. And then fast forward 3.5 years, I'm in labor with my second. We're in a new city all the way on the East Coast in New Jersey. And I didn't take any classes and I didn't do any work because I got so far with my first and I was almost there and I didn't need anything, right? So when I went into labor, this child decided that he was going to come direct OP, sunny side up, and he was going to do this his way 100% of the time. And all of my contractions were in my hips, and it really felt like somebody had a hold of each one of my hips and were pulling apart every time I had a contraction. That's what I felt. And so when I got to the hospital, I was way less dilated than I thought I would be. I was only about 3 or 4 centimeters. And in my head, I was going to go home because I had an essential stranger watching my oldest child. I was only 3 or 4 centimeters. I didn't need to be there. I was going to go home and do my thing there. But they had me sign all this paperwork, which turned out to be they were admitting me. And I guess he had like one random decel when they were monitoring him. So we're going to admit you. When I asked to go home, they said, well, you can, but it'll be AMA and like all of these things. And we're going to have social services talk to you. So it's just easier to stay. Okay, cool. Whatever. I wasn't going to go through all that. I'm like in an extreme amount of pain. I'm only 3 centimeters. I'm freaking out. I don't know who's got my I know who has my oldest, but we knew each other for like a month. I'm like, take my kid for some undeterminate amount of time and I'm going to go have another baby. So yeah, they admitted me and I proceeded to stay 3 to 4 centimeters for about 12 hours. And I had a nurse who didn't love me and I didn't love her. She kept commenting how the next day was her last day before retirement. And she would make little snide remarks like, oh, if you're in this much pain now, you're never going to have this without an epidural. cool. I didn't know that you could ask for a new nurse, so I never did. My husband, as much as he wanted to be like 100% present, he was in and out of the hospital. Like our key didn't work to let the sitter in, so he had to run home to let him in. My kid freaked out about bedtime, so he had to go home and put him to bed. There was all these like things happening where a lot of this birth I was by myself. The nurse didn't even want to be in there. She just wanted me to get an epidural, and she was pissed that I wasn't getting it. And somewhere around that 11-ish hour mark, my OB came in to round and asked to do a vaginal exam. And of course, I'm still 4 centimeters. And he put everything away, sat down on my bed, and looked at me and said, whatever is happening in your body is starting in your head. You've had a baby before. You know how to do this. This is not a giant baby. He should be out of you. So what is holding you up? And I just looked at him and started bawling, crying my eyes out, told him everything, told him about the nurse and my other kid, and it hurt and nobody was helping. And I didn't know what to do. And he was like, okay. Told my husband, you got to trust your sitter. You got to just let that go. He'll be fine. You got to stay here. The nurse had decided to walk in at that moment, and my OB went, nope, not allowed. I need you to leave. I need you to find me a new nurse. Meanwhile, my husband's over here freaking out because he's like, oh my gosh, confrontation at birth. I don't want that. He's just like, everybody stop. But this new nurse came in, and she was super young and blonde, and it was like 10 o'clock at night, right? So like when she walked in, my room was all dark and the light was behind her. It was like this angel walking into my room with her hair blowing in the wind. It was beautiful. And she gave me a hug and she said, we're going to do this however you want to do this. You've got this. You're 4 centimeters. You can have this baby. I bet you will have this baby by early morning. I'm going to go sit out there, but I'm just a button away if you need me. So she left. And then I looked at my husband and I said, I love you, but I need a snack. I need something. And he was like, oh, thank God, I'm so hungry too. So he went down the hall to get snacks from the vending machine. And as soon as the door shut, I so distinctly remember like taking a breath and just telling my kid, I'm all done. I know you're all done. Let's just be done. And I took one big deep breath and I felt his whole body move through my body, through my pelvis. And I said, I think he's coming. And I looked down and sure enough, I could see his hair. So I sat up on the bed, pushed the button, and the nurse said, because this was only less than 5 minutes from the time she left the room. She said, did I forget something in there? And I said, no, the baby's coming. And instead of saying, oh my gosh, yay, she said, oh no, you're 4 centimeters, but that pressure's good. Maybe things are changing. And all I could think of to say was, that's not my hair.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
And she said, what? And I sat up on the bed and he slid out onto the bed and started crying. And she said, is that a baby crying? And I said, yeah, he's here. She opens the door, looks, yells down the hallway, Mr. Taylor. And so they both walk in to me just very calmly holding this baby, right? Then the flurry of activity started and the OB was like literally just walking in the room at that point and paperwork. And oh my gosh. But so yeah, so that was a lot, right? Like after I got home, I had a lot to process and I was so determined to find out what that OB knew that I didn't about the whole mind-body connection. And I started reading everything I could read about birth. And then I was like, okay, cool. I get it. Like your mind has to be in the right spot to have babies, blah, blah, blah. So I put all of that material, those baby books, all of my supplies up on Marketplace. And of course, the doula was like, oh, I'll take it all. And when she came over, she asked me why I was selling all of this. I told her my story and she invited herself into my house and sat down and had this whole like birth story listening session with me. And I felt even better. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like you go to births and you keep people home and you do positions and hip squeezes and oh my God.
Do you know what I love about that, Heather? That woman in New Jersey has zero clue that her just taking the time to step inside and invite herself in and give that little bit of love to you, she has no idea how that ripple effect has happened in San Diego since she did that 12 years ago or 7 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it changed everything because after she left, I started talking to my husband about this birth work. There are these people and you can do this and you can go to these births and literally talk to him nonstop for about 8 months. as we started moving back to San Diego. And he was like, I think you just need to go do that. Stop talking to me and like maybe go do that. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. That's such a change. And I don't know if you can make a living, but I'll take a class just to see. And the universe is wise and landed me in the doula training with Jerry Ryan, and took that class. And obviously that class is where I found the Birth Education Center, took all of your classes, and 8 years later, here we are. So obviously it was for me. He knew that way before I did. But yeah, that's kind of how I fell into birth work, was really by accident.
I'm so enamored with your OB. And I don't say that about doctors very often, but oh my God, like there's something, I mean, he sounds familiar, right? He sounds like the guys that we love, that we refer to, and the midwives that we love and refer to, but it's so unique in this modern obstetric setting that so many of our clients navigate, that when you say he sat down with me and said, what are you feeling? And talk to your baby. And it feels so foreign for an obstetrician to approach it that way.
Right. And like when I look back, everything happened exactly as it needed to happen so I could be here. And I tell my son all the time that he was the driver of all of that. Like he knew what he was doing. He did all of that for me and for him and for us. But yeah, this OB, I just happened to Google OB reviews and, Hoboken, and he came up and had an opening and took me. And looking back on it, when he sat down and asked me what I was feeling and thinking, he never mentioned Pitocin. He never mentioned augmentation. It wasn't even a conversation in the room. He was just like, get your head straight, get this baby out, let's do this.
Get it together.
I'm like, okay.
So when you are starting your doula journey, this is kind of leading us down the path to what we brought you here to talk about, which is boundaries. And boundaries, sensei. I guess I just want to know, what kind of boundaries did you have coming into being a doula? I mean, I know you alluded to it a little bit when you were talking about calling your family and all that stuff, but just like, where do you think you were with boundaries when you started your doula career?
I had zero boundaries. In fact, I had what I call like the anti-boundaries, because I was going to be the most available doula. I was going to be the most present, and I was going to stay up first as long as they took, and I was going to be available 24/7, and that was going to be my thing. And that's changed a lot. But when I was growing up, especially when it comes to birth, in my family, it was just expected to be the spectator sport. And like you were expected to make the family happy, and you were expected to do what others wanted. And that's how I stayed out of trouble. And that's how I got people to like me, right? Was I'll just do whatever you want. I'll do whatever you say. I'm not going to make waves. I'm not going to be the weirdo with like different ideas about how things should go from me. And so I approached birth work the same way. When we're talking about classes, the certification and prenatal appointments and calling and being available on call time frame, I was just going to be the most open. Nobody was going to have any issue with me.
And you can see that was because you felt totally unsupported and no one was there for you, and you were hurting and no one could meet your needs. So overboard, right? And I did the exact same thing. So that's why I'm recognizing that.
Yeah, it's overcompensation is like my thing. Like if I mess up a little bit in life, if I perceive I needed something, I will swing, way the other way. And so that's what I was going to do in birth. And I thought that's what we do. I mean, this work naturally attracts the givers. This is heart work. These are people that, we want to help and we want to support and we want to give. It's just natural to us. It's innate to us. It's in us. And so it just made sense. I'm just going to give everything with a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old at home and a husband.
Because that's smart. And of course I can do it.
I bet you can guess how that lasted.
How long since you took your doula training did you come into the doula series? Because we dive deep into boundaries. It's part of how we even work together as a community really well. So how long had you been in the doula world before you came into the series?
So not at all. I took the training with Jerry Ryan, and then I went directly into your series. And then I didn't even take a birth for a good 6 months after the doula series with the Birth Education Center. And I remember that boundaries class. And it was literally me sitting there going, okay, this is all good in theory, but I'm going to do what I need to do anyways. Like, I'm not going to need this. I'll be fine.
I'm not going to need boundaries. That's like when parents come into class and they go, oh, C-section, I'm not going to have one. So they literally ignore the whole conversation.
Yep. Guilty, 100%. Because I was like, what are you talking about? You don't need to tell me how to run this. I can decide what's good for me. It'll be fine. I'm deciding that I'm going to be the most available. I'm deciding parents can call me anytime. I'm deciding I'll be on call for all 42 weeks. And what did it matter? I didn't understand why it mattered at the time.
So fast forward, you had probably been a doula about a year when you called me crying. Let's talk about that conversation.
Well, and that was because that year, my husband was laid off from work and I was the sole income earner. Like, literally just got done with the series. He lost his job and I have to float everybody through doula work. So what did I do? I took every birth that I could get for however much they wanted to pay me, for whatever kind of birth they wanted, whatever kind of expectations that the parent set, I was going to be fine with because I needed that work.
Can you like feel the non-exhale, Ashley?
Oh, I'm getting a tummy ache.
We've all been there at some point, but Heather did it for a year and it just makes me so sad.
I mean, I think I did over 40 births my very first year as a doula.
I did 9 my first year. And then I did maybe my second year, I did like 18. I worked my way up. By the time I hit 5 years, I was probably doing 35 to 40 a year. But I was charging my worth at that point, and that was a big effort and exhausting. So your first year, oh my God, Heather. Not to mention just like the emotional weight and sort of burden behind it, like driving it. I can't imagine. I don't know how you didn't just turn to dust, basically.
Let me tell you, I did over 40 my first year. I did my 9 my second year because I didn't think I was going to continue. I mean, I was exhausted. And it wasn't just 40 births. Probably a third of them were free to no cost for like how I started off. Half of them were I would have to go back and check my stats. I'd be really interested. But half of them, I would almost guarantee you, were over 24 hours of support per birth. So, I mean, I was spending more than half my life at other people's births.
And you were, I'm sure, coming out at a loss financially because if you break it down per hour, if you were taking whatever people could pay you and working on a sliding scale or not getting paid for some of them, and then the hours and hours of support that went into each one, like, you talk about trying to support a family, definitely not turning a profit, you know? Oh my God. When people say, oh, doulas charge so much and doula support is so expensive, I'm just like, you have no idea. The time that goes into each family and each birth and all that is just crazy.
The only way I was able to do that was because my husband was home. He was my childcare. I didn't have to set that up. I could leave at a moment's notice. And so I was just like, I was telling my clients, I can leave at a moment's notice. So you just call me and I'll be on my way. You know, I don't have childcare issues. Yeah. And then I called care like, I'm all done.
Yeah, you were burned out.
Yeah. And so that's when care said, so remember that class that we had on boundaries? And I'm thinking, oh, that one I didn't think I needed. What does boundaries have to do with this? Year 2 is where everything started shifting. And it wasn't an instant, like, this is how I'm going to run my business and this is how it's going to be. It was gradual, and I had to build up a lot of confidence and I had to build up a lot of courage to even set these boundaries, because in my life, when I set a boundary, I was told I was dumb and I was not doing the right thing and I wasn't there for the greater good. And so to tell these birthing families like, yeah, I have some conditions, it was really hard.
Well, and that's the one thing that we don't understand about boundaries. One, we're afraid that people are going to think we're horrible. They're not going to hire us. People in our own families are going to reject us because they have consistently with boundaries, right? And we don't understand that the boundary is actually taking care of ourselves so that we have a full cup that runs over, and with that run over, we can give to them with a full hell yes instead of a no and I'm super resentful, but I'll be here, because that's not the energy you want to bring into birth. But a lot of us do because we don't have good boundaries in our personal life, and we're too scared to set boundaries because we just have a funky idea of what a boundary is. And it takes practice. It does take courage. So I like that you said that. And it takes an understanding of I'm worth it to do this for myself, and everybody else around me is going to benefit from this. It's not a detriment, it's a benefit.
Yeah, I mean, boundaries have such a interesting connotation. A lot of people, like a wall goes up the minute you say boundary, and it's like, no, if I were a parent looking for a doula, would I want somebody who is able to sustainably run their business, and I know when I call them, they are going to be ready and full and able and willing? Or do I want a doula who's going to do whatever these parents say and be exhausted and burnt out, and when I need them, they don't have it for me, right? And when I started thinking about it that way, that this isn't a selfish situation, my boundary setting, yeah, it is going to help me, but it's also going to help every family that I come to contact with too. That's when it became a lot easier to just say, all right, I got to make some changes. Here we go.
So what were those changes? What did you look at and go, ooh, this is a big one, or I'm going to start here?
So the first thing I had to do was really assess when I could be available to these other families and when I wanted to be available to my family. And so I started setting business hours, and I tell my clients, you can call me during normal business hours, 9 to 5-ish, anytime, Monday through Friday, for whatever you need. If it's the middle of the night and it's not an I'm in labor text, you either email me or you send it to me the next morning, because I won't respond. And that was a lot easier said than done, because parents will push that boundary. You know, they're up to pee at 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night, and they shoot you off a text. And it took everything in me to stop responding to that. I'm not in labor. I don't need you right now. And I wouldn't even tell them I'll respond in the morning. I left it alone.
Well, and the tricky part is a text to a doula in the middle of the night wakes us up, because we think there is somebody in labor. And if it's just I was wondering if I should have papaya after every meal because I get heartburn. And you're like, it's now 1 a.m. and I'm wide awake and I'm on call for you and 3 other people or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, that text thing in the middle of the night, guys, reconsider when you send a text to a doula.
I like jokingly say I have like PTSD with my notifications. I tell people all the time, I have 0 notifications turned on my phone. I don't want to hear from one single app, because any notification, I've been to almost 300 births at this point, 300 families I've been on call for. I have a real love-hate relationship with the sound of my phone pinging and being afraid I missed it, right? That I slept through it, or that I missed it because my phone was on vibrate instead of, it's just, I think for real, I have a trauma response to the sound of my phone going off. So yeah, that boundary of please don't text me in the middle of the night unless you think you're in labor or something is wrong. It's so important.
That was one of my clues, right? When I started becoming annoyed with my phone, or like that pit in your stomach every time your phone goes off, that was a big red flag to me. Like, whoa, I don't even want these parents contacting me because I don't want to go to another birth. That was a huge sign for me I need to reassess. I need to slow down. I need to set these boundaries. I need to figure out what is happening, because these 40 births that I was spending all this time at, my kids are growing up at home and I'm not there. I was missing so much, and I was so stressed out for so many reasons. Births overlapping, 2 parents being in labor at once, being in labor when my kid's getting an award at school or a birthday or whatever it may be. It wasn't working. And if I didn't make those changes, it wasn't going to be sustainable. So I started with, here's when you can contact me. And then that quickly evolved into, how many births can I take a month and not spend 80% of my month stressed out that I'm going to miss something, whether it be something with my family or another birth, if 2 people are in labor.
That is such a real thing when you all of a sudden, and I've tried never to take more than 4 a month, But then if two people go early and two people go late, like all of a sudden you have all these births, and when you're at another birth, you don't want to be stressed out about someone else going into labor and having your attention be drawn to that. It's a detriment to the person right in front of you.
Yeah, and it still happens, but it's way less now.
Well, the thing is, too, there's a couple points on this that you really brought up for me. So the first is, if we're constantly thinking about who's going to go into labor, even if we're with our families, are we with our families, or are we like looking at my phone, looking at my phone, looking at my phone, looking at my, it's already we're so tethered to technology. But I try to tell people, it's like, I have this social media and I have my phone on me all the time because I'm on call all the time, and all of my business runs through these social medias. Like, I have chosen what sounds like the most holistic and like service oriented business, but I am literally tied to my phone. Everything, my whole life is in it. But then the other thing is too, is like when we talk about taking 3 births a month and we say, oh, that's 3 births a month, 3 days of the month that I'm at work, blah, blah, blah. But that means, how many prenatals am I doing for my upcoming families? How many postpartum visits do I have for my families that just had their babies last month? How many text messages, phone calls am I fielding for all my people who are due for the upcoming months? Like, it's constant. The on-call is stressful enough, but once you start a humming doula business where you have families behind you and families in front of you and families currently that you are on call for, you basically have something every day, or someone you're talking to every single day, sometimes multiple people a day. I used to try to schedule 3 prenatal visits in a day so I could just drive down to San Diego one time and do 1 in the morning, 1 at lunchtime, and 1 in the evening, because I needed to bang them out because I had all these families I was booked for the next 6 months. This is so much more complicated than people think it is.
Yeah, it's not just 3 days. And the amount of prenatals was like the next thing I tackled, right? So now I have fewer clients. They're not contacting me 24/7, which is great. But I really had to figure out why I was at these births for 2 to 3 days sometimes. Like, these births were long and just a lot. And when I really started digging into it, I realized that these people weren't educated, right? So they were just going in for inductions, unnecessary inductions, time and place for everything. I'm a strong believer in that. But we do a lot of unnecessary inductions, and then we're doing all of these interventions that we don't need. These babies aren't ready to come out, and I'm joining them from the get because they don't know anything, and they're terrified to go through this induction alone, right? And so I just said, no more of this. So I talked to Kara a lot about this. And when she suggested to me that I could require my clients to get educated before the birth or not attend the birth, I was like, whoa, I don't know if I can do that. That one felt a little like too strong, too intense, but I'm like, I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna see what happens. And so I put it in my contract. If they're not educated, done with a class by 37 weeks, I can choose to back out of the contract and not owe anybody anything. Because we are doing 2 or 3 prenatals with them, but it's not enough to cover what they need to get out of a class. When I'm in a prenatal, I'm working on connection and relationship building and a little bit of comfort measures and a little bit of what to expect at your birthplace. But
there's just no way to cover full childbirth education, answer their questions, find out what their values and beliefs are, and get on the same page in 2 prenatal visits. It's impossible.
So I said, forget this. You need to be educated. I personally have chosen to open up my prenatal. So I do closer to 3 to 4 prenatals if there's enough time between the hire and the birth. But literally one of them, parents think I'm weird because I'm just sitting in the room like getting them to talk. And we're, an hour into it before we're even talking about birth. And they're like, what are we doing? What is happening? And it's just me getting them to loosen up and relax. And we talk about dogs and cats or whatever they got running around in their house. But that's not going to help them in their birth, right? And so I started putting that into play, and it took some time, and it was like a time investment, but I have noticed that I am at births as a whole, on average, significantly fewer hours because these parents are now confident enough to do early labor. They're confident enough to not rush in for an induction. They know that they can text me and be like, this feels like active labor. What do you think? And I can say, doesn't feel like it to me. Let's try a nap. Let's reconvene in 2 hours. And, to the point where sometimes I will even go over, get them settled, relax them, do whatever they need to come into in their mind space. And then I go home and sleep. I don't stay there if I'm not needed, which was another thing that was really hard for me at first, was to leave a birth before the baby was born and be okay with that. Sometimes it's necessary.
I think something that you're speaking to, you say the parent's confidence, but I think that what you're ultimately cultivating in them is trust, because you're saying, this is what I expect of you. Here's what you can expect of me. And here are my boundaries. People think that when we're creating boundaries, we're putting up walls and maybe we're like hiding things or whatever. But actually, boundaries allow us to be our most authentic person. And our families feel that. And the time that you're spending by having more prenatal time that's more focused on connection, you cultivate this trust where when you say, you're good, you're doing great, I believe in you, you've got this, check back in with me in a little bit, they don't feel abandoned because they trust you enough to say, yeah, I'm okay. Okay, I'm going to check back in with you in a little bit. And I trust my partner. And it's because of the time we have spent together just talking, connecting with each other. And I think that a lot of people think about doulas as going in and educating families, when I'm like, that's such the bare minimum, right? I'm connecting with them on every level of expecting these babies. We're talking about how they're picking their names. We're talking about how their baby registry is going. We're talking about all of these different things related to becoming parents. How are you connecting with people in your community? Have you joined the local buy-sell trade group on Facebook? Just like all these silly things that are not related to how to get a baby out of your body, but it's about helping them cultivate what kind of parents they're going to be. Right? How are they going to become the family that they're meant to be? And all of that builds trust. So yeah, confidence. They're getting confidence in their education, but the trust they're getting from you, I think, is even more. That's really what you're giving them. It's such a gift.
And how much more empowering is it for somebody to come over and say, you've got this, you're rocking it. You don't need me right now, but I'm here when you do. Like, I would much rather somebody tell me that than like pity me and make it feel like I can't get through this unless they're there. That's not the point. I think Carrie used to always say, the less the parents actually can pinpoint exactly what you did in a birth, the better you did, right?
100%. 100%, because it's not about you. It's about them building a team to carry forward that family. Yeah, I want to be literally a fly on the wall that gave them peanut butter and jelly sandwiches afterwards.
When they asked me, like, when is the best time to come, when you didn't even realize I was there. That's when you go, oh my God, Ashley, when did you get here? That was the right time to call me.
Absolutely.
Right. And when I really dug deep, I realized how much I was making these births about me. I don't want to leave because I didn't want to miss it, because I didn't want to have to get home and come right back.
And what will they do without me? What will they do without me? I have to be here. They're not going to be able to make it. Savior complex.
So much ego. And yeah. And once I got rid of all that crap and like, this isn't about me. Now I tell every parent, I've had my 2 babies. I'm good. I don't need to do that again. This is all about you and your experience. And I am literally just there to remind you what you already know, that you are strong and powerful enough, and you are confident enough, and you are capable. And here's peanut butter and jelly. And did you pee recently?
I want to speak to the thing about the education clause in a contract, because I found with that I collected better birthing relationships with my families because they were hiring me as an educator thinking they wouldn't have to take a class. And you cannot educate in a birth room with a white coat in the room in real time, giving all the benefits, all the risks, and giving them time to understand the full scope, because there's 17 chapters that go into that full scope in that moment. You can't do it. And when parents are just hiring a doula to check it off the list and like, she'll save me, that's not the kind of birth I want to attend anyway. I'm not going to put in more effort for this baby to come into the world than the parents are. So if you're not going to take the responsibility seriously of education, thinking that this other random person who doesn't know your ins and outs is going to save you. That's not the people I'm going to work with. It's too much. I can't take that burden home. And I'm doing them a deficit because I know better. So why am I doing it?
Right. And it is so true. It's just so true. You two know me. The rest of the world doesn't know me yet. But I sometimes say things very bluntly, very directly. This is how it is. And I will tell people at a consult exactly what you said. I can't put more into this relationship than you are. Like, this has to be a two-way street. I will put everything I am into it as long as you are too. And this is how you show me that. You get educated, you communicate, you text me updates, ask questions, you want to be involved, you want to know what that experience is like. Unfortunately, I can't do it all unless you want to pay me separately, and we'll do a class, but that's going to be on top of my regular fee. We're going to get a lot more time together, so there's a lot of benefits to that. But you're not going to get everything you need out of these 3 prenatals and then birth. And I've told people, and I have recently been better at, I will not attend your birth if I feel like you haven't done the work too. And it can sound so sharp, and even me just saying it here, I'm like, oh, like that pit is in my stomach. But I'm not going to go into that birth with the right mindset if you haven't done the work too, because it's going to feel too burdensome, too heavy on my shoulders. And I don't think I need to sit there and watch everything that's going to happen to you. It's really hard to stand by and let those things happen because you didn't do the work.
And I think that's one thing that sometimes parents don't have the full scope, because we see a lot of trauma happen to our families that we care very deeply about. And a lot of it could have been prevented. In some cases, sometimes it's switching providers, sometimes it's getting more education, sometimes it's just standing up for yourself, sometimes it's not firing a nurse that you should have, could have. And depending on our advocacy level with this family, how much they've wanted us to advocate or help in the situation, sometimes we've been told not to say anything. And so we don't. And we have to sit and watch it. And that's why some of our contracts now reflect, I need you to put in effort here, because if the 3 of us are walking in, we need to all be on the same front and do this together. And I can't take 2/3 of that. I'm taking my 1/3. And it does sound sharp when you say it. I totally 100% get it. But there's a bigger picture to why we have those things in our contract, because parents don't see what we see. They see one birth, which is theirs. We see a lot more than that.
Right. And it's a very fine line, right? I'm not telling a parent what they are allowed to choose and not choose when it comes to interventions, when it comes to things that their providers are asking of them or telling them that they need, however you want to word it. But I just know that when these parents don't take the time to learn all of the things that can come up, how to ask those questions, how to navigate it, and have an opinion about it before they go into the birth, it's the snowball effect. One intervention leads to the next, to the next, to the next. And if I've got providers snipping at me for asking questions and the parents aren't speaking up about that, I'll leave. I'm not going to sit here and battle a provider that you don't even want me to talk to anyways. It is a fine line, but it goes back to, if I don't feel safe myself, mentally, physically, spiritually, in that space, I need to be allowed to leave. And it could be the parents making me feel that way. It could be a provider making me feel that way. But I know now that if I have this, gosh, I don't want to be here, I really want to leave, I could almost guarantee you the parents are like, I really wish you would just leave. And so I'm like, if I don't want to be here, I'm sure they don't want me here. And so I'll just have an open conversation. Am I still invited in this space? And it's okay if I'm not.
Wow.
And they don't understand that doesn't hurt. Well, it doesn't hurt my feelings. Like I do not want to be someplace that I'm not wanted. And I've had families say, hey, I think we're good. We're good. We'll call you afterwards. I'm like, great. Sometimes I hear from them. Sometimes I don't. Usually I do, but not. I've had a couple where I haven't. And I've thought, is it me? And then I go back to, they are autonomous humans with choice, just like I am. This is their most important stuff. If they felt like they were good to go, I'm not needed. And that's okay. It's okay.
Literally last week, I was sent home from a birth. She said, I want sleep. I want you to get sleep. I want to be alone with my husband. And I said, okay, I'm on board. I like me some sleep. No problem here. I'm just telling you that if I leave, I can almost guarantee you I'm going to miss this birth. I think you're going to move really quickly and I may not be here. And she said, that's probably okay, but I don't think it'll happen. And as the dad walked me out, he said, I think we might be okay. I think we've got it from here. I think you've done what we needed you to do. And I said, cool. Got home. 2 hours later, I got a picture of the baby. Baby did come really fast, and it was exactly what we wanted. And it was exactly how it needed to be for those parents. And it was okay. It was totally okay.
That's something I've had to get comfortable with postpartum, where I have what feels like just an incredible birth with a family, and then I just never hear from them again postpartum. And it's, yeah, because they were fine. Because you set them up for success and they were fine. And this doesn't have to be an ongoing relationship. You did your job. Your job was to set them up for success with this family. And now they're a family and they'll call you maybe next time they have another baby.
Here's the thing. Even if it's not okay, that's okay. Because they are doing the journey that they need to do. They are learning their universal life lessons that they need to learn. We did everything we could from a place of love and compassion and genuine wanting to be there for them. Sometimes people just don't mix. That's okay. There are so many personalities in this world, and you may think all prenatally and maybe even through the birth that you were a fit, and then really you weren't. Whatever. Do your thing. It's okay.
Yeah, don't be offended. One of the 5 agreements. Don't be offended.
Don't be offended.
And Heather, how did these boundaries move into your personal life? Because once you start setting them in your doula life, they come into your personal life. So how has that changed?
It's changed a lot. I don't want to get into too many personal details here, but like my relationship with my, extended family has changed a lot, and I'm a lot happier and mentally healthier for setting boundaries. And I was coming into this like boundary uprising, this boundary like cognition at the same time that COVID hit. And I had to set even more boundaries about how I was going to handle that for my nuclear family, which didn't align with how my greater family wanted to handle it. But because I had already gotten used to saying no, and the world didn't implode in on me, and I was still here standing, living every day, it was much easier for me to say, no, we're not going to go to the mall with you in April of 2020. Sorry. It became a lot easier. And truthfully, I can tell that the expectations that people have of me are very different. I am approached very differently. I am asked about things very differently. And when I say people, I mean my family, because they know that I may not say yes. In fact, I most likely won't say yes to them.
Well, and Heather, just from a doula perspective, when you have boundaries and I call you and say, hey, I need XYZ, I need this class covered or whatever, if it's not going to work for you, you'll tell me no.
Yeah. And you were the first person, I think, whoever in my life thanked me for saying no. And it might have been a class or something that I couldn't do. I was like, no, I don't think I can. I've got this, that, and the other thing. And I went into this huge justification, and you're like, it's fine. Thank you for saying no.
Take care of yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to go ask somebody else, because you always say, I would much rather you give me this is a no, so I can go find this is a yes. It frees you up from me hemming and hawing and then doing,
The energy's better. If you're not drudging, I have to teach that in class, right? That's not good for anybody that's in that class. I would much rather find a hell yes of like, yes, let me do it. I'd probably called Ashley right after.
Well, I just want to say, so like one of my favorite things about the last decade of my life in becoming a doula, this community that we created going through the doula series and all that, has been watching the journeys that my people who I met, who ultimately became some of my dearest friends, my soul sisters. Heather, you are maybe the biggest transformation I've seen from in your soul, in your confidence as a mother, your confidence as a spouse, in figuring out who you are separate from, I know you had a lot of those family attachments and like what you felt like were family obligations and ties to things that were not serving you. even from just the way, obviously, the way you look, the way you care for your body, the way you love yourself now, I'm not gonna get emotional. Sorry. Has been just like remarkable to see. You love yourself in this way. And I know as an educator that when I send you people, that you're going to take such good care of them because of the way that all of this journey, what it has cultivated in you as a person, as a doula, as a mother, as a friend, speaking as a friend and a confidant, it's just been incredible to see. And like, this is what boundaries can do. That boundaries are the purest form of self-love that there is. And it makes you better for the people around you and the people that love you. Everybody in your orbit benefits from you loving yourself enough to set boundaries. And I think that you are the best example of that in my life that I can think of. And a inspiration for me always to remember that I deserve that too. And so do my clients and my family, you know? So.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry.
No, I mean, it's overwhelming to hear, right? Because it is. You set all these boundaries, you do all this work, you take this journey, and sometimes it's hard to tell. Does anybody notice? Does anybody care? So I appreciate you, Ashley.
Heather, what advice would you give to new birth workers coming in about maybe setting boundaries before they've done 40 births in a year?
I really would love if every doula, every aspiring doula sat down and really thought about why they are coming into this work and really think hard about what their intentions are, what their goals are in terms of, am I here to save every birth? Do I have the savior complex? Am I here to educate? Am I here? Like, why are you here? Really examine that, because if you can check your ego, you'll make sure that you don't make it about you, right? And then have that foundation. And then you need to examine your personal life. What do I need to fill my own bucket on the daily? What makes me happy? Do I have young kids? If I miss their birthday, are they going to resent me? Am I going to resent the family that I am with? If so, then a boundary needs to be, if you go into labor on my kid's birthday, I'm going to send a backup. And if my family isn't okay with that, then I'm not the doula for them, right? And you have to learn to be okay with these things. You have to examine what it is that you need for yourself to be okay when your phone rings, right? It's so hard for a brand new doula to understand that phone can cause a visceral reaction within your body, a physical reaction. And I don't want people to burn out. We need doulas. We need birth workers. We need people in this for the long term. I mean, it's mind blowing to me that only 8 years in, I'm kind of on the upper end of experience just because doulas are burning out, right? We have doulas who've been in this work for 25, 30 years, but there's not a lot.
Now, speaking of unicorns, those are unicorns, you know.
I mean, we have them and they're amazing, but just for me in this time in my life, I cannot be available to somebody else 24/7. I've got 3 people living in my house that I do need to be available to 24/7. And then I really would have you examine your support system, because there is zero way on this planet that I would be able to continue this work if my husband wasn't who he is. He loves me. He loves how passionate I am about this work, and he will do anything to fuel that fire and keep it burning. And so when I call him home from work at 2:00 in the afternoon, it's like, okay, right? Like, he just does it and he never complains. He has watched these kids for days being sick because I'm at a birth, right? Probably a boundary I could have set, but that's another story. But anyways, so yeah, you have to examine your why, you have to examine what you need, and you have to examine your support system. Once you figure that out, then just start toeing and seeing what works for you and what doesn't work for you. My boundaries don't have to be your boundaries, and yours certainly don't have to be mine, but you do have to give yourself time to fill up your own bucket. It's such a cliche, but if you are pouring from an empty bucket, it's just never going to work.
Well, and if we actually set them right from the beginning, it would just be what we do. But that we're so eager to jump in that we don't, and we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and we don't want to not get hired and all the things. But that's why we're not in birth work more than a year and a half, 2 years.
Right. And that fear of rejection is so strong. And I think that fear of rejection is what fuels these boundaryless lives. And I think, don't you have a class, Care, where we just sit around and tell each other no so we can hear those no's and get used to that rejection?
We do.
Yeah. Yeah. That was probably the hardest class for me to sit through because I was like, oh my gosh, every time I heard that no, like I wanted to throw up.
It was the hardest thing for me to do when I first did it too. And that's why it's let's push our boundary out. If we are used to hearing it and realize we live through it, it's so much easier because we practiced it with safe people.
Right. So when you set that boundary and a family tells you no, thank you, because they're not willing to work within that boundary, you have to remember it's not you. It's them in this boundary, and that's okay.
You know, this whole conversation is reminding me of a Glennon Doyle quote where she says, you can choose to be perfect and admired, or you can choose to be real and be loved. And I think that there's a lot of people who come into this work or any work where it's like, I got to rack up numbers. I got to get families. I want to do the most births. I want to be the most successful. I want to be the busiest. That's not how you are the best. The best doulas are the ones who are grounded, who are deeply rooted in the type of service they're going to provide. It's that quantity over quality mindset that's going to really take away from how you're serving your families. Your boundaries are as much for the families that you're serving as they are for you. And to really, truly be the best doula to these families, to be loved by these families and be invaluable to these families, is to know yourself and provide the best version of yourself. And that requires you, like you said, knowing your why, figuring out what type of support you have to allow you to do this, and what are your no's, what are your boundaries, what are you willing to take on, and what do you need to let go because it's not for you. And that is how you are the best doula, right? That's what makes the best doulas are the ones that are like deeply engaged, not the ones who do the most births, right?
And we're all human, right? We are all going to have that birth that burns us. We are all going to have that birth where we allowed somebody to ebb and flow that boundary a little bit. It's okay. It's part of the human experience. It's how we learn. So I don't want doulas to think that if they don't come in with this completely manufactured, perfect setup, that they're going to fail. It's not that. You start small. You start with the basic boundaries, and then you build from there. A boundary is yours, so you can put it up, you can take it down, you can do whatever you want with it.
See, there are places you don't even know you need a boundary until it's totally crossed, and you're like, whoa, that one stung. And you're like, I didn't even think I needed to say that because that's not something any human would ever do to me. And then it happens. And then you go, oh, reevaluate. Half of our contracts have been rewritten and rewritten and rewritten because of what we've experienced. And it's not personal. It's just, ooh, that's a hard no for me forever. So that's one that I'm going to put in my contract for a reason.
Yeah. And just time and growth, right? It's like there are things I needed or that I thought I needed or were really important to me at the beginning of my career that are not as important to me anymore, or things that I don't feel like I need to be doing, or things that I was really strong on that boundary, but guess what? My kids are older now and they don't need that from me in particular, so I can let that go. And so you're evolving always as a human being, and that carries over to your business and the type of doula you're going to be also.
For sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here today, Heather. I appreciate it. And I mirror what Ashley said about you because it has been beautiful to watch the transformation. And I hope all of us see that in each other, but it really has been beautiful to watch that. So, all right, new doulas, open up the conversation. What do you need help with boundaries for? That's what we're here for. So tell us what you need. Let's talk about it. We'll see everybody next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.